So this is going to be the very last panel for the ZK Day. So I will let all the amazing panelists to introduce themselves and what you do, and tell me how do you want to demystify ZK in one sentence?
Sure, I can start. Hi, my name's Lily Jordan. I'm working on a project called ZK Data Guilds, which is a way to use zero-knowledge proofs to allow people to have sovereignty over their own data on social platforms. And I think aesthetically, ZK should enjoy some level of like mysticalness, but I think that it's also interesting to, I guess, demystify it by walking through the different ways that it can be applied to keep your own data sovereign while also allowing you to interact in a way that is kind of gated by what you want rather than what like companies want.
I'm Yush, usually like Yush. I like thinking about ZK, cryptography, emails, and nullifiers, and yeah.
I'm Barry. I do a lot of stuff with ZK for privacy and scaling. I'm excited to be here to see all the cool semaphore stuff and Jamoji and everything in production. I want to demystify ZKPs by encouraging people to think in a modular way, that it's possible to think about ZKPs as software, and you can abstract away the sort of CPU and transistor and all those other parts of ZKP and still get a lot of the understanding of how things work. You can build your own things and have your own ideas. That's what I want to do.
My name is Rachel. I work with Barry and Ayush at Privacy and Scaling Exploration. I do design strategy there. For me, I'm really excited about the idea of demystifying ZK through in-person interactions. Like if people can have the chance to easily collect private data and then make a ZK proof about it, I feel like that helps people think of ways that they would want to use ZK to solve problems in their own communities.
Hey everybody, I'm Tony. I'm a front-end developer working on the Zupass project, and I'd say my background comes from being kind of like a last-mile developer. So how do you go from a client-side proof you're generating to what the user is seeing, and how do you make that very smooth and seamless? And for me, demystification, first of all, says, what does the user actually care about? And most of the time, the answer is they don't care at all about the zero-knowledge proof. But sometimes you do care. If you're making a post that you want to know is anonymous, you want to show the user, hey, we're not actually revealing the pertinent information about your identity that could be tied back to you. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm interested in, and I'm excited for the panel.
Yeah, so I mean, credit to your work. I feel like starting from March to now, like my life is more and more saturated with ZK technology. Like previously, we only have Zupass. We have Zucast and Zupool, and now we're using Zupass gated Telegram, right? And here as Zuconnect, as a community, we're intentionally setting up really strict gating system, and every time we need to scan the QR code generated by your Zupass to come in. So this is like a very deliberate adoption process to basically set up for users. And this actually happens to a lot of frontier technologies, like what Barry said in 1985. When you're trying to introduce personal computers to people, you will have to basically introduce another set of like physical logic to them, right? Like how to use a mouse, how to use a keyboard, right? So in terms of like setting up this kind of like habits, what are your thoughts? I know like Jotmoji and a lot of like newer things, you're trying to basically lower the barrier for users to come. So like what's your vision and what's your next plan in terms of bringing ZK into into like people's everyday lives. I guess I'll start with Rachel. Well, designer.
Yeah, I guess like I can expand on what I was like just sharing with y'all. Like, I really feel like when you're working close to this technology, you feel like there is something magical here and there is potential, but what is it? And we spend a lot of time like working on the how do you actually put this into like an app or like something that the user experiences. But like how often do we like have we identified a problem that it can solve? And so I think like I really like appreciate that a container like Zuzulu exists for cross-pollination of ideas and like learning about challenges that people are facing in other fields and in their own communities. And like I think that's kind of where we're at right now is like identifying the problems and then creating like ZK solutions like that address that rather than like where we're kind of at a point now where we can go beyond demos.
I see. And Tony, as a front end person, what's your idea of that?
I think what we've seen with ZooPass integrating with Telegram has been a little glimpse as to what the future can look like. Telegram has its problems and its privacy concerns for sure, but it also has a huge user base. And what we're actually doing right now is ZooPass credentials, like your private keys, are stored on your web browser, but you can also sign into ZooPass through a Telegram web browser, and that keeps credentials also there. And so when you want to do an action like an anonymous post or join a chat, you don't have to leave the app. You can do it from within the app and still keeping your data in a separate location than on a Telegram server. And so that's like a little example of like, we're still keeping the sanctity of the data and we're still doing zero knowledge proofs in order to take actions, but it's, I don't know, 2 to 5 times faster than going to your browser, getting a proof, copying, pasting something, going back into Telegram. And I think the more we can get these speed ups, the more hundreds and thousands of users will be able to start using zero knowledge proofs. And they can inspect further if they want to. They can click on the drop down in ZooPass and see what fields are being revealed or not, or they can just hit prove and join the group or hit post and post something. And so I'm excited for more of that scaling on the user experience.
Yeah. So Barry, my question for you would be, I was trying to read like the descriptions of semaphore and a lot of stuff from PSC's website, and I just find myself like stuck in some vocabularies that I feel like I just need to like spend another day to explore. So how, you know, like facing a lot of junior developers in this space, and also we see a lot of, you know, Zuzalians are, you know, Gen Z developers or people are born like, you know, after 2000s, facing a lot of those, you know, really, really young developers. And how do you planning to making the protocol more accessible and more understandable?
So for semaphore specifically or things in general?
Yeah, in general, no.
Oh, interesting question. So I feel like the thing that I've been thinking about mostly recently is how to do like, okay, so I have one thing that helps with this, but also helps with other things. So what I would like to do is think more about like being able to provide data or like authenticated data. Like there's a lot of cryptography in the world. And like in Semaphore, we make ZKPs about like just one specific type of credential. And like the thing that's annoying about this is that we have to issue the credential and imbue it with meaning. And like we imbue it by meaning by saying, oh, you can't come in here unless you have this credential or this cryptography, whatever. And like we have all the ways of imbuing it with meaning. But there's all this other cryptography in the world that we want to use, like for ZK email and like Yush is working on and TLS Notary. And there's a whole bunch of other ways to export things that already make sense. Like there's a project called ZK Passport where you're able to import a proof about that you have a passport. Like your passport has a chip inside that has an RSA signature. You're able to import that and make a proof about it. So I suppose that like what I would try and do in the future for like new developers joining the space is to have the systems that they already understand and just have ways to verify them inside ZK. So I would like to be able to prove that you got an email, prove that you have a passport. These kind of things seem like a natural way for people to be able to like join. And like this is another example of the like modularization approach. That like we want to make tools that's like, okay, prove I have a passport. And as a developer, I have like a couple of function calls that I need to make. It's like prove, verify, done. Like this seems like a nice way to start to onboard more people.
Right.
Could I add something to that? I think like my answer to this question would be like to onboard more developers. It might be like unintuitive, but I think actually onboarding designers can be really helpful because you have like this confusing language, and then if you have someone coming in who like can ask questions without any like preconceived notions about it, you can like get closer to like redefining the language in a way that like can be approachable to a broader audience. And I just want to also clarify, like maybe designers is the incorrect term because there could be designers that are also developers. But like the language itself can also be like user tested, and you can get feedback and iterate on how we're describing the concepts.
Right. So there's something in like neuroscience called limbic friction. By defining limbic friction is the drowsiness, the I don't want to get up kind of feeling in the morning where you're just staring at your phone and be like, okay, I'll just, lay on bed for 10 more minutes, do my stuff. So that's limbic friction. This is like the resistance of you doing hard things where your body would naturally make you to do easier things. This is limbic friction. So onboarding new technology, onboarding new stuff, it will naturally create this limbic friction in your body and give you this feeling of, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to try this new stuff. This is difficult. This is hard. And in terms of like, a lot of times, like when we think a lot of things in our life are defaults, like drinking milk, like brushing our teeth, is actually, those habits were set up by like commercial corporations throughout like many decades. And just envisioning ZK, this is all related to like ZK's future, where how can we overcome this limbic friction of using ZK? Do you think like we need to cooperate with government or big corporations to like play commercial every day on TV until like we kind of overcome this like psychological barrier and making sure that we all like get to used to it? Like what's your like vision of that? Lily,
Yeah. Sorry, can you actually just repeat the last like sentence of that?
Yeah. So, what like do you think to overcome this like limbic friction of adopting ZK technology? Do you think we need to maybe like collaborate with big governments or corporations to like sort of like put people like sort of like putting people in a more repetitive behavior to get used to it?
I think so I think it is super important to overcome friction, because there sometimes tends to be this mentality of like, oh, if people really ideologically cared about privacy, they would like go through all these steps and jump through all these hoops to make it happen. And in reality, people have like a limited amount of attention and time in their day. And so I think that's just like unrealistic and not going to happen. I wouldn't say though that we have to get governments and corporations on board. I think that like the better path is to start directly by making alternatives that are as easy to use as possible. One possible road to this is even just like building applications like these that are like totally like centralized Web 2, not even like on chain or in ZK at all. And then once those like those applications are kind of tested against what users actually want and people are used to them, then transition them to more secure ZK or decentralized models. Because I think there's like a certain level of like hardness that you get from ZK and from like programmable cryptography that's really important for a couple of like applications, like anything financial or reputational or like stuff where you really need cryptography because you risk real world consequences with like governments or anything. And then apart from that, though, I think there's like, especially for sort of like toy or gamified applications, there's a lot you can do with like getting people used to systems that are like sufficiently anonymous just to play around with, and then using those to iterate on like design patterns that you can then use when you need like hardcore anonymity.
Yeah.
I would say that's totally correct. And I think there's like a couple of ways that I think people can be really intentional about designing ZK apps to make them lower friction. I think things around designing for the right specific kinds of communities. I think having interdisciplinary teams, and I think really having like an eye towards how do we make this really easy to use. I think we've seen a lot, for instance, with Jomoji, a very targeted like focus on, hey, we want to make sure that this experience is really magical. Or we want to make sure that the communities we're kind of trying to reach are people who like find some specific value in it. And I think there's a lot of value in combining, for instance, if we want to use ZK technology, not just for ZK technology, but in places where this kind of anonymity is like critical. We've seen people already experiment on like interesting Web 2 anonymity primitives. We've seen things like confessions work and things like anonymous platforms like Reddit and to some extent Twitter have relevance. And in some of these, we see verifications in small aspects, like maybe there's subreddits in which there's like a specific verification process to prove you're a specific kind of human and you have a specific kind of property. And there's a lot of interesting things you can do with it. And I think really like tying into like specific communities that are already harnessing some form of verification or some form of anonymity is a really powerful way to say, oh, like, what if we made this like more seamless than it currently is? Because a lot of these processes are super, super frictionful. Like trying to verify that you're the specific person you are on Reddit requires this like you holding a picture of your username, and it's this kind of like kind of odd system of things that doesn't really verify it, but is kind of okay enough. And I think starting in communities where it's actually needed is a really interesting place, because you can go from, instead of it feeling like high friction, feeling like lower friction to what people are used to. Yeah, and I think having teams where you have designers and strategists and people from all different kind of walks of life, people who care about the anonymity, people who don't, I think leads to a really interdisciplinary outlook in which that lower friction as well as like technological hardness is achieved simultaneously.
Right.
Yeah, like I don't think we can like convince or like force anyone to care about ZK or to care about private data ownership, but I do think that we can like find ways to help them experience it and then like decide for themselves if that's of value to them.
Right. And again, I'm from a background which is very liberal arts. I studied history and journalism back in school, and then worked as in-house journalist and product person for 2 tech companies before I joined crypto. But like right now, if you walk out of this bookstore and just grab someone walking on the Istanbul street and ask them, have you heard of Bitcoin? Maybe they'll say yes. But if you ask them, have you heard of Ethereum? Maybe 8 out of 10 will say no. And out of this 2 people who know about Ethereum, ask them, have you heard of ZK? Maybe they never heard of ZK. But like if you ask, have you heard of WorkCoin? Maybe they heard about WorkCoin. So I would say like the maybe WorkCoin would be the first product that popularized the ZK technology. So like I'm really curious, and also really curious about everyone else in this space. Like, what do you think about WorkCoin as I would say out of the rabbit hole, out of our little bubble kind of product, which is like a lot more popularized and a lot more notable in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's definitely super worthwhile to make this stuff actually well known and publicized. With WorldCoin, I am like a little bit worried that the association people are initially going to get with ZK is like scary surveillance thing, as opposed to like a thing that's like probably actually doing like less surveillance than like the alternatives, which is like the government signing you up and like they're scanning your eyeballs instead. So I'm hopeful that things end up going in that direction. With WorldCoin specifically, I think it's a really cool idea. The main concern I have, I think, is not like, oh, this like creepy thing is like scanning your eyes specifically, even though like I think people have reasons to be like freaked out about the vibes of that. It's more that like hardware is just really hard to secure, like under any circumstances. It's hard to, there's kind of like a double bind where if you open source it, it's easier to reverse engineer. And even if you don't open source it, it's still possible to reverse engineer eventually. Like stuff like this gets hacked all the time. And also you end up with like this like security from obscurity situation with which people aren't necessarily able to trust. And so like my best guess also is that like, I think another thing that you sometimes run into with systems like this that are trying to do a proof of unique humanity or identity just based on one factor, even if like irises are like pretty legit and unique among people, is that then you end up with a kind of like a Goodhart's law situation where like if you're relying on like one specific factor of like what it means to be human that you're relying on to do identity entirely, then people are incentivized to just generate as much of that as possible, whether it's like using AI to generate like fake or even like producing physical fake eyeballs, right? And so I like like getting a market for grave robbing, I don't know. And so I expect that the best solutions here are going to be ones like, for instance, proof of humanity, or like I think Gitcoin Passport, which uses like multiple different factors, is going to be useful because one, then those are composable and individual applications can decide like how many do they need to consider you uniquely human. And also too, that just opens up like less of like one single attack or optimization vector and more of like a holistic view of like what a unique identity actually means.
What about everyone else's opinion on WorkCoin?
I mean, I think there's a really big trade-off space of proof of humanities. We touched on this a little bit, but I think like, scanning your irises is one point on the curve, but there's also, for instance, doing like a ZK proof of a Gitcoin passport score, like Lily mentioned, that can prove that you are kind of softly KYC. There's also like harder KYCs, like you can do ZK proofs of passports, like Barry was mentioning. There's multiple ways you can do this, not just passports. There's like Indian ID cards, and there's like Japanese ID cards, and there's like the new like French standards, and all of these like different places have signatures in them from the government. And so ultimately, like, this is another point on the trade-off curve where you can say, oh, the government has attested that I'm a unique human, and I can prove that in ZK. There's also like places where you can prove that a KYC organization proved that you were a unique human in ZK. You can say like, I can prove to you I have a verification email from Coinbase. And so I've already been verified to be a unique human. I never have to do that again. And I think it's important to have a rich set of choices that people can make, but I think it's also important to choose like, why do we want KYC in this application? If it's for ZK voting, then maybe if we're voting in a country, then maybe that's a better solution. Or if we're using it to make sure people on my application are unique, then maybe reusing someone else's proof of humanity, like Coinbase or Airbnb, is a more prudent solution. And I think it's important to trade off how users think about it, as well as what affordances it actually gives you.
I think it's important to remember that there's 1 billion people in the world who don't have any documents to prove that they don't have any passport or any government issued credentials. This puts us in a very difficult position because we want to make like the cryptocurrency community accessible to these people, but at the same time we don't really have like a way to assure that we don't have a way to assess their proof of individuality. And it leads us to like some very difficult trade-offs. Like, do we do iris scanning with this kind of like trusted hardware stuff? Or do we do like social graph based attestations? Or that's just a really hard problem.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we're building this new world where cryptography and credentials are what's used to enforce the like rules of society. But if we're not able to welcome these people into our new crypto society, it seems like very bad.
Yeah. I have this weird feeling where proof of humanity sounds nice, sounds well intended, but the process of being proved that you're human is, on the contrary, very inhuman. That's how I feel. Like when I was being scanned by Iris, the orb, right? When I was being scanned by the orb, when I was like, sort of like writing down my Ethereum address and hold it and take a picture and then upload that picture, to prove of humanity, the project, I felt somehow really bad. I'm intrinsically human, but why I have to prove this digitally? Like, why? I just want to exist unapologetically. I want to be approved unapologetically. I have a lot of thoughts about WorkCoin, but we can unpack later.
The weird thing about the way that WorldCoin works is the orb isn't. If I understand correctly, the orb is just used to have an authenticated picture. And as soon as you have an authenticated picture, you can just use ZK on any device to make the proof. That it seems like just merging the two, what's essentially a camera, and just pretending like it's this magic thing. I think that authenticated pictures could be really, really cool. But that's going to be true to the hardware too.
Yeah.
But it's starting to happen to trying to combat deep fakes and things like that. Well, that's a whole other. There's a bunch of problems here. Because what you can do is you can make a picture and then take a picture of the picture, right? And then it looks like it's an authentic picture, but it's not, right? Okay. So anyway, just ignore the last.
Perceptual hashing can help resolve some of these problems. There's a lot of interesting mixes of cryptography and existing algorithms that can give you some advances. But I agree, the more hardware becomes attested, the more that we'll have diverse data sources to choose from. A tested microphone and a tested camera and then all these different things.
Are Jobmoji's the answer?
So something I have been excited about with them is that you're collecting a bunch of private data to hold, but it's you're collecting it through human to human interactions. And that feels less dehumanizing.
Yeah.
It's instead of it being you and a robot, as Barry could collect my Jamoji, Ayush's, Lily's, and build this collection and then prove so many different things, either that he met us individually or that he's met all three of us, that he went to a certain event. So the idea that for anyone that this is new to, I'm holding one of the Jobmoji cards, to collect the signature that's on here, you have to be in person. It's using NFC, so you need to be near this to collect that.
Yeah. Behind the orb is also a human, PC holding it mostly. So with that, I feel you're trying to emphasize more on the person as a holding it, and maybe more interaction could be made, not just packet, but there could be more feedback to so it doesn't feel like you're an NPC holding the NFC.
That's a good point, because there have been moments where, especially when there's multiple people at once who collect, where I feel like an NPC, and I'm just
Yeah, I was just gonna add on that I think there's a lot of awesome technology in the crypto and the ZK space, and a lot of times people are looking for problems to solve with it instead of the other way around, which are what problems do we have and does this technology actually solve them? And Manu's leaving, but I'm gonna give him a shout out.
So you have to leave.
Okay, I'll see you later. We had a quick conversation the other day, and for those he runs the party raving community, and he was like, we do really need a decentralized identity system based on social attestation, where if you're going to invite someone into a special space, you want to have some confidence that they're going to respect the rules of the group. But you also don't want your identity publicly tied to it. Like who knows if my employer I wouldn't want them to see I've gone to 10 raves in the last week. and so it is that was one of the first examples where I was okay, actually you want to prove that you're a member of this group. You want to prove some number of attestations. Maybe you got your initial invite through a physical Jobmoji card. And then you can have recursive I'm 2 degrees from someone, I have this much voting power. And I'm just putting it out there as I think we need to keep looking for cases where this technology does make sense, and it doesn't have to be like nation state level secure if it's who gets to come to the concert. And in that case, we can kind of skip some of the like hardware problems and still be pushing the technology forward.
Yeah, I think going into crypto last year, joining crypto as a full-time person, I had this sort of come to Jesus moment. One would be reading the Ethereum white paper. I was like, whoa, this is world computer, so cool. And the second time was when I learned about ZK technology of what it can do is I can verify a lot of attributes of myself without revealing a lot of things about myself. That was like, ooh. So given each one of you unlimited resource, how would you bring back this? How would you bring not just the come to Jesus feeling, but like the actual Jesus come? Sorry, it's a bad metaphor.
How to bring back Jesus?
It's on the roadmap.
Resurrection.
How to amaze me, not just me, like feeling this is great. How to, bring some real world change with unlimited resource and time.
And time. I just wait. I was thinking about like, should we do like 1 billion emojis? Like that seems fun. Like everyone has like a little bit of cryptography in their pocket, but like the problem is to try and make it useful for them to use it. Like you could have like a wallet that they could use, and you can have like ZKPs because it has the ECDSA signature as well. That seems like it could be cool, but it seems like just like, okay, let's just do that and hope for the best. But I'm a very optimistic person.
What about everyone else?
So with unlimited resources, how would you help people?
Yeah. How do you help people? How to bring technology to everyone? Like early day PayPal, right? PayPal gave people the new user on board PayPal $10 to create this network effect. Let's say
For me, it's like, I think I'm asking myself, like, why are we trying to bring this to everyone? Like, is there a need? And like, if there is a need that's validated through research, then like, let's go for it. And let's make something that people like use because like they're choosing to. It like solves a problem for them. And so when we're talking about unlimited resources, I do think like research takes a lot of resources.
so more research.
Yeah. More like
Very last.
more interviews, talking to people, going into their communities. Also like, letting them like get a feel for the technology by using it themselves. Like we don't have to be the ones who identify the problems. We can like invite other people to identify the problems if they can like feel what the technology can do. That takes time and money.
Okay. More answers?
It's very pragmatic.
Oh, wait, more. Yeah. Maybe this is like coming off the high of like network state conference, but I think where my mind would be is like, I think there's kind of like two approaches to like putting something into the world that people will be amazed by or really get into using. There's maybe three. So two common ones are like, one, just like do it really incrementally, slowly make changes in existing systems and lobby and like eventually make it happen. And then another is to like try and like build out the entire product in advance and like prematurely optimize and solve for every problem in advance. And that usually kind of just dies in the early stages because all that stuff is so hard to anticipate. And then I think like a really cool third and like underrated one is the concept of the small but really good like fully featured demo. I think Zizulu actually is like kind of that, which is pretty cool. Like it's small and limited time and limited number of people, but it's basically like a pop-up city with Zupass and experimental events and all this stuff. And so I think unlimited resources, I like buy out an island, buy out a portion of the woods for, 3 months and get a group of people together to just experiment with like a tiny little society with like fully featured like reputation system and internal currency and maybe like ZKML with a ton of compute and just try and hash out the real world problems that happen in like a super small scale and then try to expand to the rest of the world.
Are you Shantini?
Yeah, I think money and time is useful for when like you've identified the problem and now you want to like go and attack it. But I think actually the thing that we need right now is more like intentionality on where these proofs are used. Like what is the community in which this proof like makes their lives like 5x easier. And I think like thinking about I don't think the goal right now is like get 1 billion people on ZK proofs and plug. And the goal is get like 100 people to find it like critical to their lives. Absolutely. And like I think when you start there, then I think money and time is just useful to make sure that it's done in the right way. Like it's done not by like a for-profit company trying to exploit them, but it's done by open source projects that have sufficient resources that they're not forced to take advantage of the people that they're trying to help. Or I think it's helpful to accelerate research. Like if you have people who are trying to figure out the practical problems, like how do we make these faster? How do we make these more accessible? How do we make them work in consumer hardware? And then like enabling that research and funneling it into different people who have different talents and want to contribute to that, I think is also a really important way to allocate that money and time. But I think the critical block right now is just intentionality.
Right. Yeah, that reminds me of what you were saying in your talk the other day about it being open source being really important. Do you want to like say why? Because I feel like that requires lots of resources.
It's a good question. I think like only really in this space have we seen like everything by default open source and the effects that has. Mm-hmm. And I think even like Tony can comment on this with his past contributing to different open source repositories. But if you have, a public good that is completely open source, can be forked by anyone, then people have an opportunity to either voice or exit. They can say, I do or don't like this system, and I can switch to a different version of the system that someone else runs with different trade-offs and different care. And I think this allows you to have like a vast multitude of approaches to the problem that isn't just, we're going to trust this one company to do it right and really hope that they're not selling our data, really hope that they're not taking advantage of us. Instead, it's like, no, actually, like, we embrace the humility that we don't know all the answers, and that actually, like, different people bringing this tech up in small ways in their own community is actually like a really empowering thing. And being able to accelerate that and have that be a public good, I think is actually like super underrated. On the surface, it seems like, oh, well, the thing does the same thing. Why does it matter if it's open source or closed source? Why does it matter if it's owned by a company or owned by a nonprofit? But I think in practice, like in the long tail and the long arc of these things, we see that it's actually much more interesting in many cases when anyone can contribute to that or change it or put their own voice in.
I'm just gonna take a different approach to end it off. So first thing I would do is find someone to jailbreak the current iOS, and then I would completely redesign the iPhone with all the nice screen and UX that we like, but all your data is just completely localized. Like there's not weird tasks running in the background, uploading shit to Apple, and that's the default. Like we all really like the UX, but now we have the actual opportunity to selectively disclose almost all of our pertinent data, which is now stored on these devices that we carry around all the time. And so I feel like it's not going to happen because there's a lot of incentive to have access to this data for all of the companies out there. But I think that would also give power back to the users of like, okay, if you actually can't get my data through nefarious means and you have to ask for it nicely, how does that change like the type of data that is requested from us? And does that also give users a chance to like have the checkbox of like, okay, like I'm revealing this one thing in exchange for this. And I feel like right now maybe the best we get is like the cookie pop-up on a lot of websites and no one actually knows what they're agreeing or not agreeing to. And that's what I would do with my money.
Oh, I love this answer. I think we're around out of time, but this whole conversation, what I were just touching upon, will be carried out to tomorrow's discussion, which would be the decentralized social day, where we're going to not only talk about a lot of things. It's not just about technology, it's about more like community building, as you just mentioned, about intentionality. Also, we're going to invite a lot of, OGs from the DWAP camp, DWAP community, who, been working on like the PV communication to some relevant, more relevant topics, such as how we use, Zeek technology and cryptography to secure your social data and your social your sovereignty on the digital world. So yeah, tomorrow if you're still around, be excited for Decentralized Social Day. And without further ado, let's give a round of applause to all the panelists today. And okay. I actually don't know like what time is it in, but I guess we can maybe spend 5 minutes on Q&A. Yeah.
I have been in charge of marketing and linking projects, and one of the most challenging for linking projects like how to find the real users, like ambassadors. I think they have been done a lot of work to research on the technology, tracking technology, but however, I think we haven't to balance between to involve more real users to understand this technology. So my question would be like, what do you think is the most important thing to realize this?
Yeah. How to onboard your mom, basically.
Or real users.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Answers?
Billion Joe modes.
One hacking iPhone system, hacking iOS. Yeah.
I think it's like identifying a need. Like you have to first know what people want and then build the thing that they want. Like the other approach would be building the thing and like asking people to come use it.
Yeah, and it's a lot of like errors and trials. Like in the past when Tim Berners-Lee invented World Wide Web, there are like many ways to like link those web pages together, and there are like a lot of famous failed projects like Xnandu. So like a lot of histories are buried in the past that we don't know, but the web, the internet we know today, is actually grew out of a lot of failures and explorations and weird stuff.
I to that question. I think that like another thing we can do is try to meet users where they are. That we always try and make like credentials and give them meaning. But I think there's a lot of people who would be very interested in things like ZK passport, proving you have a passport, you're a citizen of a country. I feel like just bringing meaning to other people's data could be like a nice way to expand. I suppose that meaning is not the right word, but bringing like a way for them to use that data in a more privacy preserving way. That like a lot of like your passport, your RSA signature of your passport is not very useful except for when you go to the automatic passport machine. But I think that there would be many useful use cases if you were able to have privacy on top. Like you could have this really nice KYC, ZK KYC thing if you wanted to.
Just to add one more thing there is like from the lens of marketing, it's like sometimes we build things that people have said they want, but like then we have the challenge of communicating to them why and how it is that thing that they want. And that gets into like the language that we use and
Limbic friction.
Yeah.
Colton?
Is there any chance of governments or private corporations being motivated to just start building ZK into the products that they already have, or does it have to come from just convincing people and just putting consumers to start using this stuff and put pressure on these organizations?
So there's already a bunch of, so let me repeat the question. So the question was, does it have to come from big businesses to integrate cryptography, or like, does it have to come from like users banding together, or can like big businesses integrate? And like to answer that question, I think that like It does not. I feel like the big companies are already using a bunch of cryptography. They're just not using the like programmable cryptography that we're talking about. See when we talk about CKPs. So I expect that like this is going to happen too.
I'll just add, if you heard Brian's talk earlier today, he was talking about how it's actually really tedious for any like integration to happen between like Equifax and like the U.S. government or like some other Web 2 service you have. And there's an argument that if you have your data with a proof of correctness attached, that kind of serves as a universal chunk of data that can be passed in between those services. And from the pure, like, this is a more efficient way to do things perspective, that's another potential thing that I could see happening.
I think you also don't necessarily need consent of the like corporation or the government or whatever, as long as they're signing some data that already is like a proof that we can use and even build programmable cryptography over it. So like, for instance, if they send an email, then you already know that you can extract whatever information is in that email and program the way that you want to interact with that. And there's other like kind of subtle like little ways that their signature is hidden online that you can just almost like hijack and say, okay, actually now like we can derive programmable cryptography from this. And I think that's also really powerful.
Okay, one last question. The gentleman.
To ask that because it's come up a few times for KYC. So they use those something for that. So at the moment, I think KYC is mostly something that is mandated by regulation for money laundering or sanctions. And so I would think that usually applications try and avoid it, or like would only do it if it's mandated. And so if what you're talking about, if KYC becomes cheaper and easier by these applications, you see lots of use cases where applications would sort of voluntarily implement KYC because it helps their community or their ecosystem, or is it something where you would say, if ideally at some point the government says, well, you can also do KYC always in April, like what's the end?
Yeah, so the question was, is ZK KYC something applications are actually voluntarily going to want, or is it just something that comes into play in terms of like regulatory compliance? So I think like one of the biggest applications of KYC that applications actually want is for Sybil resistance, and especially like for protocols that involve some kind of like democracy, or where it's important to have one person, one vote, or one person, one token, or whatever. Like Gitcoin, for instance, like it's hard to run that without something like Gitcoin Passport or like quadratic voting or any kind of voting mechanism. That's really important. For other stuff like money laundering and sanctions, it'd be cool to get a world where eventually the government accepts ZK, or different governments accept ZK as sufficient for that, because obviously that's going to be more privacy preserving. But then I think you can also think of it in terms of like, even if you want to build some totally separate parallel financial system, ultimately you run into the same problems that cause governments to like want to impose money laundering and sanctions and stuff, those types of regulations in the first place. And so an application that gets large enough, I think ultimately also needs to take care of like reputation and taxation and stuff in the same way.
Okay, that's the wrap up the panel.